I don't know about you, but I've been teaching public speaking every year since 1986. And that's not 1980, but it's going back pretty far. And I still care very much about this class. And I know that some of you teach public speaking, or some of you have learned about public speaking. And there's the question of, do we want to do model learning as opposed to starting from scratch? I'm somebody who likes students to be able to look at example outlines from previous students and to watch speeches from previous students. I think it allows them to see the practice of public speaking as a little bit more attainable, a little bit more realistic, not some mysterious practice that only those who are endowed and born with special skills can do. So I like to make public speaking a little bit more accessible to students. My boss, the dean, who's a sociologist, asked me once, how much of public speaking is learned versus natural? And I said, I think it's about 90% learned, which is good news, because it isn't like the high jump, where only a few select people have the genetics to be successful high jumpers. I think it's a very practical skill that just about anybody can learn. So the question is, if we're going to show example speeches for students, how do we do that? Do we bring in a former student to recreate a speech? That's not necessarily the most practical thing. And so do we use videotape speeches? Well, we have lots of choices nowadays that we didn't used to have. There's YouTube, where you can YouTube informative speeches and see some of those. Can I get a show of hands of any of the instructors or even students who may have looked up things? Have you ever tried to find, what was your experience? Did you find speeches that you would be happy to show to exemplify effective speaking?
Some and some.
Some and some not, but I like to show both.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. But it is nice to have
Yeah.
exemplary speeches, or speeches that at least we could say demonstrate most of what we're trying to get across. Okay, well, I found this to be an enormous challenge, not only with something like YouTube, but even with professionally produced videos. And so, fortunately, and I don't mean this to be an infomercial for Pearson Custom, all right? But Pearson is the publisher of a book that at Rogers State University, the book we use, which is actually a very inexpensive book by Stephen and Susan Beebe, not their full-blown, I don't even know the title anymore, that I used back in 1986, but a concise public speaking handbook, which is maybe $40 now, not $100. And with that, if you notice from the URL, oh, you don't see it here yet, but they created a custom website for us, which is pretty helpful. But most of their, all of their people, all of their authors use what's called My Search Lab now, and this is a brand new iteration of what they have done. They've had My Speech Kit, My Communication Lab, this is My Search Lab, and this is one way to be able to show students speeches. Okay? So this says it's a ceremonial speech, and I just want to show you a few introductions, right? Not to take too much time, but I want you to think about the way that you teach public speaking in terms of content, organization, delivery, and you can decide if you think this does a better job than it maybe a YouTube. I hope we have sound. We have no sound. I don't suppose anybody knows how to figure out the sound on here.
It doesn't look like there's a cord, like there's typically.
I should have tested the sound. I don't know if this is something. There's volume.
On the computer, is the little sound muted?
Brush and paints.
There you go.
I like to make something beautiful when I run.
Okay, let me.
I like to make people stop and say,
okay.
some people create with words, or with music, or with a brush and paints. I like to make something beautiful when I run. I like to make people stop and say, I've never seen anyone run like that before. It's more than just a race, it's a style. It's doing something better than anyone else. It's being creative. Steve Prefontaine, or as his fans called him, Pre, is perhaps the greatest distance runner of all time. If you had to pick one word to describe Pre, it would be determination. In his day, Steve was a living legend. As a junior and senior in high school, he went undefeated in both cross country and track. As a senior, Steve broke the American record for 2 miles and garnered the attention of the University of Oregon. As a collegiate athlete, he won 7 NCAA titles. And by
So, what would you say in terms of maybe strengths or weaknesses as, you know, I stopped it here, but at this point in the speech, what would you say as far as public speaking principles?
Creative style, but manuscript wouldn't go for what I do.
You teach extemporaneous delivery?
Yes.
I do too. Okay, anything else?
Introduce the topic well.
Captured attention pretty well, right?
We know where he's going.
Okay. Now you may not have noticed, but he's in the body of the speech now. I think there was a pretty good central idea, thesis statement, but I didn't get any kind of preview of main points. Okay, so anyway, but that's just one. They have lots, they have like 200 speeches, they tell me. So let's see what else. There's one on depression. Where's this? Here we go. This is an informative speech on depression.
Today I'm going to talk to you about a disease, a serious disease, which can even lead to death. This disease preys upon people of all ages, despite their color, whether or not they eat a regular diet, or who they come in contact with. Mental depression is a disease which can overwhelm any of us. In depression, by Drs. Geis and Jefferson, at least 10% of the population.
Okay, so there was another introduction.
Really?
Today I'm going to talk about, didn't capture the audience's attention. Anything else?
Could he stand up, please?
Yes.
Yeah, he's sitting down, that doesn't really teach. I mean, there's no lectern, which is not, the other guy we didn't mention the guy was hiding behind a lectern in the first one, which I don't let them use.
And the other guy didn't have his shirt tucked in. He's dressed better,
Right, that's good.
which is kind of a nice contrast of good and bad of age.
Yeah.
I think it probably would have, depending on what the speech was, probably would have more appeal, like emotionally, if he would have sat down and made somebody feel more comfortable, but I don't think he delivered it well to be in that situation.
Okay, yeah, a good central idea in there, I forget what it was now, but he did a good job with that. But again, no preview statement, and you can see what direction, not looking at the audience, he's pretty much, you know, you can have note cards and still have manuscript delivery, right? Okay, so these are professional, provided by Pearson. And let's see, here's one. Informative speech, tall girl.
Hi, I'm the helpful tall girl. You need that plate taken down from the top shelf in the cabinet? I'm your girl. Can't reach that can of baked beans in aisle 7. Just ask me. If you're a tall person, it's kind of an unwritten rule. If someone can't reach something, you might as well just take it down for them because they're just going to ask you to help anyway. In every group, there's that one tall girl. And I'm sure she makes the rest of you aware of the good and the bad that comes along with her height. Tall women simply have a unique perspective. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about some general facts and experiences, as well as some disadvantages and benefits that come along with height.
So let's hold our thoughts. I want to show one more. Yeah, okay. And then we'll discuss them too.
I like that she actually said the word height correctly.
Not height,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so let's see. Let's go elsewhere in Pearson. Okay, so on this one, under resources, I can get videos, and then there's one called additional videos. There are lots more in here.
As a child, were you ever afraid that there was a monster hiding under your bed, or that there might be the boogeyman in your closet? I know that to this day, I still hate to walk in the dark in an unfamiliar place. These fears are very well founded because there are some real monsters in this world, and they go by the name of serial killers. Serial killers are very much unlike any other murderers. I will be discussing what makes serial killers different from the average murderer and the circumstances in their lives that can trigger a person into becoming a serial killer.
Okay, so we've just shown several different examples, and so on the first couple of speeches, I kind of criticized them, and you did too. But what I want to do is talk about some of the problems with these speeches, whether they're found on YouTube or even professional websites, and talk about maybe some of the things that maybe could be done better. So first of all, oftentimes in these speeches, delivery is manuscript rather than extemporaneous. The other, and so the problems with manuscript delivery is I don't want my students to read their speeches because that really is just comp 3, right? They're really not learning anything about the performance of communication. It bores the audience to tears to have people just standing there reading. And a problem that nobody else has talked about that I really should try to write an article on is the problem of plagiarism by proxy.
Mm-hmm.
To me, when a student reads a speech off of note cards, that is a red flag for plagiarism because it suggests the possibility that it isn't even their speech and that somebody else created the speech for them, maybe a previous semester or someone who gave the speech 2 weeks ago in somebody else's section, and that they simply took that person's outline, changed the name, and now they're writing it out on note cards. A student who speaks extemporaneously, to me, that's one sign, not a telltale absolute, but it's a sign that they did their own work. And a fourth problem related to this first problem with manuscript is oftentimes the speaker will hide behind a lectern. And then we have a student make an A in public speaking, and then the first time they give a real speech, and maybe their professor is there and very proud and going, hey, you better watch this student, and they don't know what to do with their hands, and their feet are going all over the place, they're doing pirouettes, and very distracting, and it looks like they've never given a speech before. These are some of the problems that we have. Now, yeah, we had one lectern speaker, and we had 2 speakers that read off the note cards. Now, if the speech isn't manuscript delivery, oftentimes it is memorized delivery. Did you notice that one of these speeches, one of these 4, was memorized? Which one was that? Tall Girls. Okay, now forget the feminist critique of that whole title. And the other thing is it was labeled, do you remember what the label was? What genre of speech? It was labeled an informative speech, but that wasn't an informative speech, was it? That wasn't an extemporaneous speech. That wasn't a classroom speech. That wasn't a freshman taking speech. It was a very unrealistic portrayal of an after-dinner speech done for speech competition with memorized delivery. Boom, boom, boom. Okay? And Pearson just throws it up there, just like the other textbook companies. They really don't discriminate with those things. So they don't really learn anything about extemporaneous delivery, and that speech, that third speech, really makes it seem that public speaking is a mysterious thing that only specially endowed people can do because of that emphasis on polish, on the perfect execution of delivery, which extemporaneous delivery is not going to be perfect. It's thinking while speaking, therefore mistakes are understandable, they're tolerable, and we learn from them. Now, if the speech is extemporaneous, right, and that's kind of what we're shooting for in a freshman speech class, oftentimes there's a problem of the speech was great in class, the instructor said, oh, we've got to get this on video. So we take that student, put them in an artificial situation, put a camera on them, ask them to recreate that excellent extemporaneous speech, and what happens? They freeze up more, they rely on the note card, maybe don't even use the same note card, now they've got more on it, and their energy level shrinks to almost 0 compared to their affable, enthusiastic presentation in class. Just too artificial. And a final problem with a lot of these speeches is that the production values can be terrible. Some of these were okay, but most of these were just, somebody had a camera in the back of the room, maybe it was mic'd, maybe it wasn't, but you get that all the time on YouTube, especially if it's an online speech class and the student's just doing this themselves. But even when an instructor has it, usually they're not mic'd, or the camera's shaky, or they don't know how to frame a shot. Or in the case of Pearson, when I've talked to them about this, Pearson actually prefers head-to-toe shot the entire time, floor shot, a full body shot the entire time, which is pretty tough to sit through for even 5 minutes. So these are some of the problems here. Now, I don't know if you noticed the fourth speech, but let's